Hello and welcome to the interview series of Stevens Leadership Portal, presented by the School of Business at Stevens Institute of Technology. These conversations explore compelling topics at the intersections of leadership, innovation, and inclusivity. I'm Dr. Wei Zheng, Richard R. Rossett Endowed Chair Professor in Leadership at Stevens. Annie DeStefano is the Vice President at Silicon Valley Bank, where she works with CEOs and founders of venture-backed Fintech companies. Prior to Silicon Valley Bank, Annie held roles in engineering, product management, and operations at Foursquare, and worked as a member of the launch team for the Marcus by Goldman Sachs consumer banking platform. In 2019, she was named an Inspiring Fintech Female by the NYC Fintech Women Organization. She graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in Business and Technology from the School of Business at Stevens Institute of Technology and is now serving as a member of the Stevens School of Business Board of Advisors. In this interview, Annie shared her experience and insights into the transition from a peer to a manager, her give first before take principle of networking, and how to win support from others. Well, thank you so much, Annie, for speaking with us. I really appreciate the chance to hear your stories. At the very, very beginning, could you give us a little bit overview of your career history?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the time and the opportunity to share my story, a little bit about what life has looked like for me since I graduated Stevens. So right when I graduated Stevens, I started my career at Goldman Sachs over in New York City. And really, I joined the technology division and the innovation group at the bank. A lot of the work that I did early on in my career was technical, thinking about the commercialization of technology and how does Goldman, really manage, which at the time was a multi-billion-dollar technology division. And it was a really great experience to be exposed to that side of financial services and the technology world, because Goldman was very much an engineering hub, as much as it was a financial powerhouse. During my time there, I started on a project which is now known as Marcus by Goldman Sachs, which is the consumer bank that Goldman incubated and built. So I had the opportunity to join that team during the end of my tenure at the firm. From there, I was looking to take a little bit of a break from financial services and experience a technology startup, one that was a little bit more mature, a little bit larger in size. And so I was connected to the executive team at Foursquare, which is a venture-backed company in the location intelligence space. So I joined that team in more of a chief of staff, operations, and strategy type of role. At the time, Foursquare was looking at some acquisition efforts and really thinking about how to expand the business as it got more mature in its stage as a tech company. And the combination of all those experiences of technology and finance has led me to my current position where I'm at Silicon Valley Bank working on our Fintech banking team. And just to briefly give a little bit of context on Silicon Valley Bank, or SVB, as we affectionately call it, it's a 35 plus year old bank that's focused on serving the innovation economy. So all of our customers and our clients have some role within the broader venture capital ecosystem, or the innovation economy, as we call it. So all of the clients I work with are Fintech startup companies. And really my role is to build a relationship with them and be a trusted advisor to them for their banking needs, an advocate for them in market, connect them to key folks in the ecosystem, and really be a point person for them as they're working through the challenges of starting a young company and what they need out of their banking partner, and navigate that process with them in partnership. So that's kind of the distilled version of my career over the last few years here.
That's very impressive. I assume you also, like other leaders, you started as an individual contributor and then moved into more of a leadership role. So what was it like? Are there particular milestones, important milestones in that transition?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I don't think no one's fully grown as a leader. I think, I'm still growing, and it's always something that you have to work on and nurture and give time to. I would say some distinct milestones probably would be, when I assumed direct management oversight for individuals, which I did during my time and my career thus far, and really having to take myself out of the colleague seat and being a supportive colleague and a teammate to people, and then being their direct manager. And they're really looking to me to help them answer questions they have and work with them about career growth. You talk about compensation, you talk about, challenges they're having. And it's a little bit different of a dynamic than being a supportive colleague to them and a peer versus their direct managers.
Was that difficult, that transition from being somebody's peer and colleague to somebody's direct manager? What was difficult about that, and how did you overcome some of the difficulties?
Well, I'll start with the second part of, I think overcoming any difficulties with that is just so predicated on trust and communication. If you have a situation where it's a tough dynamic to grow into, just building the trust with your direct report or reports, as well as being, an open book and communicating with them really goes a long way in trying to mitigate any issues or awkwardness with it. But certainly it is difficult to navigate. You're used to being someone that is kind of unbiased. Someone's just a colleague that's talking to you and maybe venting their frustrations to you, but they're not necessarily looking for you to solve it and solve the problem. So having to take yourself and kind of change that mindset and that behavior and share with your colleague, in the past, maybe you just talk to me openly about issues you're having. Now I'm going to take it as my responsibility to solve that for you and help you navigate that situation. So being upfront and sharing that it's a new dynamic you're going through as their leader and that you'll work through it together. But it certainly can be an awkward transition from, the friend at work to then being their direct boss, and making sure that you sort of make it clear that you're still can be a friend to them, but also you now have a responsibility that you might have not previously had in your relationship.
What helped you in that transition? Did you have mentors, people you can talk things out with, or some other ways of support in that transition?
Absolutely have mentors. I have been really fortunate to have had, many kind of key mentors that I still have throughout my career that I'm able to call up or email or jump on a FaceTime with and just talk through situations that I'm facing professionally. And having, their executive experience and their mindset available has been incredibly helpful for me to grow as a leader and to take their advice, to learn from them. And I think most importantly, hear things that went wrong for them and situations that they maybe would have changed or navigated differently, and kind of learn from the mistakes of your mentor too, because everyone has mistakes and stories to tell, and being able to learn from their experiences in the past and where they think they maybe would have handled something differently helps inform how I grow as a leader and think about situations as well.
Do you have an example of either a success or a failure where you learned something from in general in your career?
And failure is just such a scary word and a strong word.
Or a challenge,
Yeah, exactly. I know.
Yes.
No, it's not one we should shy away from, for sure. There's probably been situations in the past where I should have leaned in a little bit more to knowing that my role wasn't their direct manager. And sometimes I think that it could come off to people if you start meddling in their situation or their business or trying to, solve a problem for them, but you're not their direct manager. But I can help as a senior member of the team, improve whatever their challenges that they're working through, but not necessarily have to be the one that's sharing all of the direct feedback with them. Being respectful and mindful of their existing management structure and their leadership chain, I think is important too, especially if you're a senior person on the team that can influence decision, but you're not necessarily the only one, that formally is making the decision or has direct oversight.
And recently in 2019, actually, you were awarded as an NYC Inspiring Fintech Female in the category of network building. Could you tell us about it a little bit?
Well, that was a really exciting, opportunity for me in 2019. So just some context of the New York City Fintech Women group is a membership group that is focused on bringing together women as well as men in the fintech ecosystem. So a lot of the members of the group are operators at fintech companies or finance firms. They might be startup founders themselves, investors, people that are cheerleaders and advocates of the fintech industry, but not necessarily in the industry. So it's really a group that's grown from a few members to thousands of members that are involved in events, programming, as well as recognition of people in the ecosystem. So the award was probably unexpected, at least from my point of view, but it was really exciting to be recognized and humbling to be recognized by peers in that fashion. In particular, the networking award really was kind of reminded me about the importance to network properly. And what I mean by that is, not building relationships because you need something from the other person, or only reaching out to someone because you have an agenda or something that you need from them. Truly taking an invested interest in what is going on in that person's life, how you can be helpful to them. I always try to give first before I take. And I think that's helped me actually build really strong relationships in the ecosystem and professionally, where people know if they hear from me, it's not because I want something from them. And I don't come out of the woodwork when I only need something from them. I'm actually genuinely reaching out to them to see how they're doing. So I think the network building aspect with that recognition really meant a lot to me. And it's something that, I hope to continue to do. And more importantly, use that network as a way to mentor younger women and women starting out in their career within fintech and finance. So it's a really, really great network. You should definitely check out their events, which these days are all virtual, but amazing nonetheless.
How do you go about network building? Do you have particular goals in mind, or do you just pick up any events that come to your desk? Or what are your strategies?
It's been pretty organic. I try to just make myself available and open-minded to opportunities and conversations. So one distinct strategy has been to leverage social media. I think there's a lot of noise on social media, but there's also a lot of benefit to using the platforms as well. So on Twitter and LinkedIn, I'll get messages or reach out to people myself, and it's actually helped me grow my network quite a bit. It's been really beneficial during the times we're going through now with COVID, because no one is meeting in person. So by being able to leverage, a brand that I'm building for myself on Twitter or LinkedIn, share my thoughts on fintech or share my thoughts on technology, it's opened the door to conversations with people I would have never normally met. And then, it's easy enough to hop on a Zoom or a call or kind of build a relationship from there. So I think a distinct strategy is figuring out what medium is the right one for you, and how you might have to adapt your approach to changing times. I like to use social media, especially with everything going on now virtually. And it's helped me kind of get into the door in a lot of conversations with people I might not normally meet. And I would say the other strategy is, what I mentioned before of it has to be honest. You have to be networking, not to get ahead or not to push your agenda. I think you can be thoughtful about having distinct requests of people or asks of them once you build the credibility and have a relationship with them. But if you start the conversation from that place, people see through that. And I think it really kind of cheapens your effort. You don't want to build that precedent with someone that you're building a relationship with.
Do you have an example of your principle of giving first? I know just as we speak, you are giving me first. I just reached out to you and you're very kindly agreed to give your time and share your wisdom with us. Do you have another example where you start to connect with someone new and you try to give something first?
I was introduced through a previous employer to, someone that I worked with on a contract, and they introduced me to one of their friends who was a woman looking to change her career path and wanted to have lunch. So we had lunch together. I, shared my thoughts, made some introductions for her, tried to help expand my network and open my network up to her. And there wasn't really anything I was looking, out of that conversation other than, building a relationship and seeing how I could be helpful. Eventually, that actually led to, unbeknownst to me, she had a close friend that was starting a fintech company. And, months later, she said to me, like, would you like to meet my friend? He's starting a fintech company. And to this present day, that's actually turned into one of my closest client relationships, that introduction she gave me. You don't know how people are connected to one another, and you just never know down the line who they'll come up with and want to introduce you to.
Great example. Thank you. So your job currently is Vice President of Relationship Management. So I assume network building is part of your job as well. Do you use any disciplines in your work or non-work related aspects of network building? For example, some people spend a certain percentage of their work time developing new network connections, or some people have different layers of goals, target groups to network with. Do you have any principles you work on to build your relationships?
I think I really relied on serendipity, for lack of a better word, in the past, where I would go to a conference or an event and you have people that there and you start conversing with, and you're at a cocktail hour or a dinner, and then they introduce you to other people that are at the event. And it's just a very kind of fluid situation, and you happen to just have a group of people in the same place at the same time. We, of course, can't do that anymore, or at least we're not doing that right now. I need to be much more deliberate and make sure that I'm, as I said earlier, nurturing the relationships. So I know that I can't count on the fact that I'm going to see this person at a conference in October and we connect there. It's just not happening, rightfully so, because of health and safety reasons. So I've been trying to make myself really schedule my catch-ups and look at my calendar. So tomorrow, will be the first of the month, look at my calendar, go through my contacts, look through my old meetings and see who have I not talked to in a while, and reach out to them in August to set up time with them and catch up via Zoom or a phone call or just via email, and make a deliberate effort to schedule that, because I can't rely on, the idea of serendipity and just sort of bumping into someone anymore.
So talking about education, and you got a Bachelor of Science degree in Business and Technology from our school, which we're really proud of. So how has your background in business and technology helped you or hindered you or in what aspects did your educational background help you?
I think it has absolutely helped me in my career. The whole intent of the business and technology program when I enrolled was to prepare students to be business leaders that not only understood the fundamentals technically, financially, had the core spine that you need from an education standpoint to be a technical and business leader, but to also groom us to be able to be communicators that could talk the business side and also talk the technology side. And I think that having that combination has helped me in my career, where I can communicate with executives, share a little bit more of a 40,000 foot view on something, but then also jump down to, the 1,000 foot view and get in the weeds on something that might be technical, or analyze a problem or due diligence on something, and be able to oscillate between the 40,000 and the 1,000 and be dynamic like that is so important in business, in the business world these days. Everything is changing rapidly. Nothing is staying the same. So being able to, go with the times and evolve, and then be able to communicate that with executive presence, I think is exactly what the business and technology program prepared me to do professionally. And I think the technology aspect helps me build credibility with clients, with engineers, with product managers I might be working with, just knowing that I can dive a little bit deeper into a topic or know what questions to ask or ask the right questions.
Does the technology aspect or focus from your educational background, does it ever hinder you in any aspect or limit you?
I don't think think it limits me. I think that you have to create your own story and narrative out of it. I feel like people might get caught up on, am I more business or am I more technology? And do I just have to go down that one path? Or is, me being more technical hindering me from having, for lack of a better term, front office roles at a company or something that's more sales or revenue producing? And I don't think those are all just kind of labels. And I think it can hinder you if you let it hinder you. But if you use the combination of that education to your advantage, like you can be sort of unstoppable, like kind of a secret weapon for companies where you can do everything, where you can talk the technology, but also talk the business strategy and operations. I've made a concerted effort to talk about my background and share, my learnings and continue my education to not pigeonhole myself into any one thing. So I think that is where it can hinder you if you pigeonhole yourself too much, because I think that will put you at a disadvantage, quite frankly, with how quickly business is changing these days, if there's sort of only one skill that you've been honing based off of your education.
So you mentioned telling the story or narrative of you. Do you have sort of an elevator pitch? You have very, very limited amount of time. How would you tell your story?
Just being honest about the fact that I have done work that spanned operations, product, finance at large and small organizations. And I think, hitting upon the type of organizations I've been at just by size and by industry, and then all the different roles that I've had within them. So, positioning myself as operator, strategist, banker, that's what I'm doing now in my current role, and just sharing kind of that variety of experience with people, and also knowing who your audience is too. If you're talking to a specific audience, maybe if it's a more executive audience, talk about the more higher level strategic things that you've been a part of or projects that you've worked on, and sort of tailoring, your introduction and your pitch to the right audience, and connecting with them that way.
So how do you prepare for conversations like those, talking at high levels versus low levels? What do you do to help you prepare for those conversations on a daily basis?
On a daily basis, it's probably just doing your research and diligence. If you're talking to a certain company or, whoever you might have meetings scheduled with, like take a few minutes before the meeting. Don't just rush from meeting to meeting. Try to take a few minutes and look up the person on LinkedIn, like understand a little bit more about who you're about to talk to, and just do a little bit of mental preparation of, okay, like these are some things we might have in common. Like I should bring up these items, or I see that this person had a master's degree from Stevens. Like I should share more about my background with Stevens. And taking the time out of your day or your week to know who are you talking to for the next few days, and being prepared if you have a very clear request of the person that you're talking to. Preparation doesn't have to be a very long, drawn out thing. It could just be taking a few minutes to orient yourself and mentally prepare for the conversation, and have a few brief data points that you could hit on when you're talking to someone.
So I assume in your current job, you interface with a lot of founders and management teams of venture-backed fintech companies.
Yep.
And I assume they have different products and innovations they have. What do you do to keep up with up-to-date technologies or enough knowledge that you can have an intelligent conversation with various companies?
I think that I use a lot of resources online. I religiously read Twitter for better or for worse, but I do, I'm always on Twitter, just following certain thought leaders in fintech, investors, companies that I work with or want to work with, technology leaders, business leaders, just reading what's going on and what they're saying on Twitter. I also do sign up for and follow a bunch of newsletters. So recommendations from colleagues of mine, as well as newsletters I found myself, and really just try to make sure that I maybe spend, the top of my week going through the newsletters I get and looking at the headlines and understanding. But yeah, it's a battle to keep up with the amount of information that's out there. And then also sometimes if I'm catching up with someone, I just ask them, like, what are you reading these days, or what's been a great resource for you? to stay up to date with technology and banking and finance and fintech. And more often than not, people have recommendations for you that are helpful. It's a little bit interesting because we don't have our commute these days. So that could be time that you use to listen to a podcast or listen to a newsletter recording. And now you have to carve out that time a little bit for yourself. So Twitter has been probably the most efficient way I stay up to date with what's going on and try to learn new things.
Could you give us an example, one or two examples of the leaders you follow and the newsletters you read regularly?
I follow a bunch of fintech investors and sort of influencers. So a few names that come to mind. So Frank Rotman, he is an investor at QED, which is a fintech firm. And he has just really interesting commentary about the space. And he's just an incredibly dynamic leader with his background. And he's sort of a veteran in the fintech space. I also follow some consultancy type of brands in the ecosystem. So there's one called 11FS, and I know some of the folks that work there, and they put out a bunch of great content on fintech. So I'm always following what they're putting out. They put out videos, they do breakfast interviews, all virtual. They're always doing recaps of what's going on in the fintech world. So I follow them on Twitter. From a pure business leader standpoint, there is a woman, Kat Cole, who she's the COO and president of Focus Brands, which owns a lot of brands that we might all know, like Auntie Anne's and Cinnabon and other kind of quick service chains. And she puts out a lot of great leadership and business content on Twitter and social media as well. So one newsletter that I would share, it is a subscription newsletter called Technically, and it is it's on a platform called Substack, and it is a newsletter that basically distills extremely technical topics into basic terminology and terms. So, if you've been wondering about what does an API mean and you want to understand more about what an API is, this newsletter takes topics like that and really distills it into kind of the basic brass tacks of what something might be. So it's a really good newsletter to read.
Thank you. Now I'm going to transition a little bit again to talk about women in tech. In technology space, women are underrepresented. And I assume what's in your experience? You have been in this tech space in your career mostly. So what's your experience like as a woman in the tech space? What are some experiences? How have you been navigating these underrepresentation problem of women?
So I'm really passionate about women in technology and women in fintech. I think the truth of the situation is that we're sitting here in 2020 and the stats are still pretty abysmal in general from a diversity and inclusion standpoint in these industries. And so there's a lot of work to be done and would have hoped to see more progress in 2020, but that's kind of not been the case. It hasn't moved as fast as I would have liked. I think I've navigated situations where I can sometimes be the only woman in the room, or, the only woman on a call or a meeting. And I think the best piece of advice I probably ever got in thinking about how to overcome some of the imposter syndrome you might get in those situations is a woman that was a senior woman that I worked with in the past. She said to me very early on, I think it was maybe like my first or second week on the job. And she was like, Annie, make sure you have an opinion on things. Don't worry about being right or wrong. Just have an opinion on things. And I think about that to this day. If I'm the only person that might have my viewpoint in the room or be the only woman in a conversation, don't let that stop me from having an opinion on things. And if anything, I have to have a stronger voice and really share my viewpoint. And it doesn't mean to have an opinion that you're being combative or, causing any issue like that or conflict. It just means that you're using your voice for the conversation. So I think it's really important, in particular for women that, may not find themselves in a situation where there's anyone that they could look to as an ally, whether it be a woman or a man, and just use their voice in the conversation and have an opinion and viewpoint on things. And also, it's okay if you don't, but take the opportunity to say, hey, like, I'm not really sure about this. Like, I would love to hear other people's opinions or thoughts, but make it clear that you're a voice at the table for a reason, and you have something to say. There's a lot of work to be done in the space, but I'm really excited about some of the organizations I've been involved in and work that we're doing, and working with women junior to me and senior to me to bring about real change with some of the representation in different industries.
I'm very interested in supporting women in tech. I'm actually currently leading a few initiatives at Stevens to provide resources for women's leadership development in tech industries. So you have been very supportive of advancing women in technology as well. I see you are a mentor. You have been a mentor for Girls Who Code, and you have been supporting these diversity and inclusivity initiatives as well. What are some important things or practices, programs that you find particularly effective in accelerating women's leadership development in tech industries?
Well, a lot of programs, larger companies have the resources to put on themselves. That's always helpful to get involved if you're at an internship or a corporation you're at, to see what offerings HR is providing for different networks, and in particular, women's leadership type of initiatives within a company. So I've taken advantage of that in some of my past roles and with past employers. And I think also just getting involved in some of the external networks out there. I think there were conferences that were put on in person, but they've gone virtual. But, New York Women in Fintech is one example. There's other kind of more nationwide groups. There's virtual mentoring groups you can sign up for that are bringing together women from, different industries at similar points in their career. It's just so easy to have access to these groups now because everything's online and you can just sign up virtually. So trying to bring together those groups is something that, I've been focused on in my role. And also just taking advantage of online programs and sort of small circle mentoring groups, which seem to be really popular these days. And I think it's also important to enlist the help of allies with all of this, because we're talking about women in tech, and specifically, you should find men that are allies and bring them along for your journey and say, I need you to back me up in the room, or I need you to echo, my voice in conversations and be an ally to me. I think that's so important to have allies in this, and to not isolate men from this effort just because it's advancing women in tech or women in fintech. Also, bring men along as allies too, and they want to help. More often than not, they want to support your efforts too, and would appreciate you, thinking of them in that fashion also.
Well, that's an interesting idea, because usually we talk about women supporting other women in terms of amplifying their voices, giving them proper credits and all sorts of things. And you brought up the idea of asking for allyship from men. Do you have an example of how you have approached a man in particular to ask for allyship? How did you ask, and how did it work?
So I've worked kind of in past roles to have a senior executive that he was more on the technology side of the work we were doing. And I would just, drop by his office. We would catch up. We would talk about, what's going on. He would ask how I'm doing. And I would ask just, for his general support. You don't have to have anything other, just have a conversation where it'd say, hey, like, I'd really appreciate if you support me in this project I'm doing, or in this upcoming meeting, this is what I'm going to be presenting. I'd love to have your support in the room and kind of advocate, lend your voice to the conversation. And people, they get it, and they know that you're looking for their mentorship and guidance. And I think also going to them, asking for their feedback on some of your work product in the process, saying, for an example, I'll say the name's Joe, like, hey, Joe, like, I would love your feedback on this presentation I'm going to give at the meeting that we're both in, next week. And kind of by doing that, you're building an ally in the process, and they're part of the process with you in refining your work product. So they're going to lend a voice to supporting you when you're sharing your viewpoint in the room with a broader audience. So I think a way to do it is to bring people into getting their thoughts and feedback on something that you're preparing for a meeting or a project deliverable helps in building that allyship.
So one potential risk of doing that In my previous research, there's for women to asking for feedback especially from men. Sometimes it could be interpreted as needing help or not competent enough or wanting to be saved. What are some ways to avoid that from happening, but while still seeking feedback from potential allies?
I feel like not asking for help or not putting yourself out there is it's just not constructive to helping yourself in your career. I just think that everything's so collaborative these days. I don't think showing vulnerability is a bad thing. I think you can show strength and vulnerability, to be honest, and saying that because I'm asking for your feedback on this or your help, you're bringing them into your orbit and your ecosystem, and then you start collaborating with them. It's not like you're just passing it off to them and saying like, I can't do this, I don't know what I'm doing. You're trying to make a concerted effort. And I think people respect seeing your process and understanding your line of thinking. And if that means asking for help, I think it also creates a dynamic where they respect you more and see your strength because you are thinking thoughtfully and critically about what you're doing and the effort you're putting into your work product and what you would like it to look like on the other end. So I don't think vulnerability should be viewed as a bad thing. I think we're actually seeing now in business with what's going on in the world where I'm having probably more vulnerable conversations with clients and colleagues than I ever did because of what's happening with the world these days. And I think it's helping to build stronger relationships, having that vulnerability. I think it could be showing weakness by not asking for help in a way.
Excellent. Thank you. During this time of COVID and all the disruptions and changes, what are some ways you take care of yourself?
So every morning, weather permitting, I go for probably like a 3 to 4 mile walk. And I do that before my day gets started. I don't wake up and immediately jump into email. I might check my email on my phone, make sure there's no urgent call or text or something. But if, my meetings don't start until 9 or 9:30, I take a few hours before all of that to just have time for myself, like take a long walk, listen to a podcast maybe I didn't get to, listen to music, call family, catch up with people in my personal life, and just use that as time to strategize and clear my head a little bit. I think just jumping right into your work these days it's not sustainable because we're in a marathon. It's not a sprint right now, and you have to create the space for yourself. And I put blocks on my calendar of times, I'm not going to take meetings unless we really need to book something at that time. I try to have that morning ritual and routine and, try to put a little bit of a deadline of when I'm going to close up email for the day, close the laptop and have the evening to myself to have dinner, with my husband and maybe check back in later, but not try to sprinting through a marathon will never work.
Just out of curiosity, what podcast do you usually listen to?
There's one called, I'm going to forget the name off the top of my head. I think it's called SaaStr, and they do conversations with business leaders at kind of like high growth firms. So I've listened to some really interesting conversations with like business leaders, and they seem to focus on kind of SaaS-based business models or talk to VCs. It's called SaaStr, SaaStr.
Well, thank you so much. That's all of my questions. This is really interesting conversation. Thank you so much.
Oh, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. You can find more compelling stories and evidence-based insights at the Stevens Leadership Portal website. Our purpose is to inspire new ways of thinking, leading, and problem solving.